The rain poured steadily outside, drumming against the thatched roof like 1,000 tiny drums. Inside the small mud-walled hut, a flickering fire cast long shadows across the floor, where 5 children sat cross-legged, their eyes wide and unblinking. Smoke curled lazily toward the rafters, dancing around the beams before disappearing into the darkness above. The air smelled of wet earth and burning wood. The old woman hunched near the fire, her back bent like the bow of a hunter long retired. Her hands were wrinkled, bones sharp beneath her thin skin, but her eyes, clouded with age, still held a strange light. She stirred the pot hanging over the flames absent-mindedly, though the food had long since finished cooking. The children waited. They always knew when she was about to speak. She would stop stirring, lean closer to the flames, and whisper something low enough that the wind had to hush just to hear. Tonight the moment came. "This," she said, her voice a gravelly hush, "is the story of the girl who only wanted help, but paid too great a price." The fire crackled sharply. A boy near the front jumped, his hand tightening on the little cloth bundle he used as a pillow. Another child, barely 8, reached out to touch the old woman's knee as if to steady herself. The woman's gaze drifted toward the door, her voice now just above the hiss of rain. "She was no different from you," she continued. "Hungry, scared, good in her heart. But the world doesn't always return what we give it. Sometimes it takes more." Outside, thunder cracked. The children all flinched. A wind gust pushed against the walls, and the wooden door creaked open an inch, though no one had touched it. One of the children turned quickly, eyes darting toward the shadows just beyond the threshold. The old woman didn't move. "There are spirits in these woods," she whispered, eyes fixed on the open door. "Old things. Tall things. They listen when we beg. But not all that answers is kind." A flash of lightning lit the hut for a heartbeat, and in that brief moment, something moved beyond the door. A shape. Just a flicker. Then it was gone. The old woman's voice dropped to a whisper again. "Now hush, and listen." The sun had long since turned cruel. What once bathed the village of Marua in warmth now scorched it like punishment. Cracks split the ground like old wounds reopened, and dust clung to the air like smoke from an unseen fire. Nothing grew anymore. No maize, no yams, not even the wild beans the poorest families once relied on. Chickens lay thin-shelled eggs that never hatched. Goats bleated with hollow cries, their ribs poking out like the fingers of the dead. At 14, Nia had become an expert at hunger. She could go 2 days without eating and still carry firewood from the riverbed, still haul water from the cracked well that now yielded more mud than moisture. Her hands were calloused, her arms scarred from thorns and bamboo lashes. But her eyes, dark, wide, and far too old for her face, never stopped searching. Searching for a way. Searching for a sign. Her mother coughed in the corner of their collapsing hut, a thin reed of a woman whose skin hung too loosely on her bones. She hadn't spoken much in days. When she did, her words were jumbled like she was trying to talk through a dream. Fever had taken hold of her, and the herbs that once cured such sickness now grew nowhere near. Nia would sit beside her in the mornings, wiping the sweat from her brow with the edge of her dress, whispering, "It's all right, Mama. I'll fix it." But each day her voice grew less certain. The village chief had laughed when she asked for help. "You think yours is the only family that suffers?" he scoffed, leaning back in his woven chair, chewing bitter kola nut as if the drought didn't touch him. "What makes your mother more special than the rest?" "I'll work," she pleaded. "I'll clean the council hut, carry grain, sweep the paths." "There's no grain to carry," he snapped. "And no paths left to sweep. Go." So she went. From house to house. First the elders, then the younger mothers, even the boys who used to tease her behind the schoolhouse. Some turned away without a word. Others offered half-rotten cassava or water sour with algae. None of it was enough. Not for her mother. Not for the ache that lived in Nia's own belly like a knot that refused to untie. That night, she sat outside the hut, staring at the dry horizon, watching the moon rise like a pale, quiet witness. The world was silent. Too silent. Even the insects had grown tired of singing. Her grandmother had once told stories on nights like this, back when the earth was still generous. Stories of a place deep in the forest, far beyond the yam fields and river stones. A place where 3 tall spirits stood guard over a sacred spring. They were older than the trees, she said, and taller than any man. They did not live or die like people. They waited. Waited for those who were brave, or desperate, enough to find them. "The 3 tall ones," her grandmother had whispered. "They only help those with true need. But they always ask for something in return." "What do they ask for?" Nia had asked, barely 10 years old then. Her grandmother had only smiled, half bitter, half afraid. Sometimes, only your silence. Sometimes, more. Now, as Nia listened to the wheezing rasp of her mother's sleep and felt her stomach curl around nothing, the story returned to her like smoke creeping beneath a door. No one in the village dared go that deep into the forest. They said it was cursed, full of forgotten bones and trees that moved when your back was turned. But the fear of the forest now felt smaller than the certainty of death in this village. Smaller than watching her mother waste away under a sun that showed no mercy. By dawn, she had packed what little she owned, a calabash half full of brownish water, a cloth bundle with a piece of smoked rat meat she'd hidden from the last village meal, and a small wooden carving of her mother, something she'd whittled herself during better days. She wrapped it all in a faded shawl and tied it to her back. She didn't say goodbye. What would she say? There was no one to hear it. She passed the council hut while the guards still slept, their spears leaning carelessly against the wall. She walked past the cracked well, past the ghost trees, past the broken fence where goats once played. Then, with nothing but the forest ahead and the whispers of her grandmother's voice echoing in her mind, Nia stepped beyond the path the village had always feared. The trees closed around her like an exhale. Light filtered through the thick canopy above in trembling veins of gold. The air smelled of wet leaves and rot and something else, something older than memory. She walked. And the forest watched. The deeper Nia ventured into the forest, the more the world seemed to change around her. Time loosened its grip. Daylight filtered through the canopy in long, trembling shafts, never quite settling into morning or evening. The air thickened, moist and heavy, filled with sounds she couldn't name. Low hums, distant wails, the rustle of unseen wings. She walked for hours, or maybe days. Her legs ached, her throat burned, and the water in her calabash had long run out. Still she pressed forward. Turning back felt impossible, like the trees behind her had grown teeth. Her thoughts floated in and out of dreams, memories bleeding into visions. Once, she thought she saw her mother standing among the vines, calling her name with a mouth that did not move. By the time she stumbled into the clearing, her body was trembling. It was a wide, circular space, too perfect to be natural. The trees here bent backward, arching away from the center like they feared whatever stood there. The ground was bare, covered in fine white ash. In the middle of it, 3 figures waited. Tall, towering, unmoving. They stood in a triangle, each spaced equally from the other. At first, Nia thought they were carved statues, stone or wood shaped into men. Their skin was black as midnight but smooth and gleaming, like polished obsidian. They wore no robes or armor, no beads or feathers like the elders back home. Only thick bands of silver circled their necks, wrists and ankles, pulsing softly with light. And their eyes, those eyes, glowed. Not with heat or fire but with something deeper. Something ancient. Pale blue, almost white. They stared without blinking, without turning, as if they had always been looking at her. Nia fell to her knees. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was weight. As though their presence pressed down on her chest, made her bones bow. One of them stepped forward. The movement was too smooth, too perfect. No sound came from his feet, not even when he walked across the ash. His voice was low, warm and calm, but it rang inside her head more than her ears. "You have come far," he said. Nia nodded, struggling to form words. I need help." The second figure moved then. A ripple in the ash swirled at his feet. His voice was deeper, slower, like the echo of a mountain cave. "All who come here need something." "My village is dying," she whispered. "My mother is sick. We have no water. No food. Please." "I heard," my grandmother said, "there was a spring." The third man tilted his head. He was the tallest. His mouth did not move, but the voice arrived anyway, soft and cold like river wind. "We remember your grandmother." Nia's breath caught. She felt suddenly naked, exposed. "You do." "She came," the first said. "She left." The second's glowing eyes narrowed. "She left alone." The third spoke again. "You are not like her." "I'll do whatever it takes," Nia said quickly, almost tripping over the words. "Please. I don't care what it is. Just help her. Help us." A long silence followed. The 3 men did not look at one another, yet something passed between them, some unspoken current. Then slowly all 3 raised their hands. From the forest shadows, a shape approached, low, quiet, gliding across the ash. A wooden tray, carried by no visible hand, floated to her feet. On it sat a bowl of thick stew still steaming. A carved gourd filled with clear, shimmering water. And a folded cloth with a dry mat. "Eat," the first said. "Drink," the second added. Rest, finished the third. Nia's mouth watered before she could stop it. Her hands shook as she lifted the bowl. The stew was rich, meat, herbs, something like pepper but stronger, warmer. The water was cool and pure, cleaner than anything she'd ever tasted. She ate until her stomach hurt. She drank until she could feel her blood waking up again. Then she curled onto the mat and cried without knowing why. Later, hours maybe, they stood over her once more. This time their presence felt softer. Like a fog curling around her thoughts. "We will help you," the first said. "But first," said the second, "you must help us." Her heart skipped. "How?" she asked. The third stepped closer. "A small favor." She sat up. "You must obey. You must not question," said the second. "You must be silent," the third finished. Nia hesitated. The stew still sat warm in her belly. Her hands no longer trembled. Her mother's face returned to her mind, sunken, burning with fever. "I understand," she whispered. "Yes, I agree." The three tall ones stared at her. Then, without words, they turned and walked into the shadows. And Nia followed. At first it didn't feel like servitude. The tall ones spoke gently, always in soft tones that echoed in her mind rather than her ears. Their words carried weight but not force, at least not at first. The tasks they gave her began simply. Sweep the ash from the clearing, polish the silver bands at their feet, collect glowing mushrooms from beneath the red-rooted trees. Every time she finished a task, one of them would appear, sometimes with food, sometimes with water, sometimes just to say, "You are doing well, child." Nia took those words like medicine. The forest no longer frightened her. Or perhaps she'd just grown numb to it. The strange sounds, whispers that sounded like voices, birds that didn't flap their wings, the ground that sometimes pulsed like a living thing, became part of her world. She was tired constantly but not enough to stop. Each time she felt doubt, her mind returned to her mother, to the village, to the promise that all of this would be worth it. But slowly the tasks began to change. One night she was awoken before the second moon rose. A soft hum filled the air, shaking her bones. She stumbled out into the clearing where the tall ones waited, not speaking. At their feet were 3 bundles wrapped in dark green cloth, tied with vines that moved slightly as if breathing. Without explanation they handed her one. "Carry it to the bone tree," one said. She opened her mouth to ask what was inside, but the words withered in her throat. The way the bundle throbbed gently in her arms told her she didn't want to know. Later, she was told to light incense beneath stone idols carved in grotesque shapes, faces that looked too human and yet not human at all. She was told to chant words she didn't understand, words that made her tongue ache and her chest tighten. Afterward, she'd be dizzy for hours, eyes burning with colors she couldn't name. She noticed others then, girls in the shadows. They didn't speak. They moved quietly, never meeting her gaze. Their eyes were hollow, their cheeks sunken, skin sallow with fatigue. Some of them couldn't have been older than 10. One had her fingers wrapped in cloth, blood seeping through as if she had no nails left. Another limped and winced with every step. "Who are they?" Nia asked one night, finally brave enough to whisper to the nearest tall one. "They were like you," he replied. "They came with need. They obeyed. Why don't they leave?" He turned slowly toward her, and though his glowing eyes didn't narrow, she felt the air shift. "They know the cost of disobedience." That night, her sleep was broken by screams, distant, muffled, yet unmistakably human. When she rushed out of her hut, the forest was still. Silent. No one else stirred. The next day, one of the girls was missing. Despite everything, Nia continued. She told herself she was different. That she had a purpose, a reason. That if she endured just a little longer, she would save her mother. Save everyone. The tall ones reminded her constantly, "Your reward is near. The spring will come. The village will thrive." She repeated those words in her mind like prayer. But the price kept rising. One of the tall ones, she never knew their names, though they surely had them, began to watch her more closely. At first he was the kindest. He gave her extra food, offered soft cloth for her mat, allowed her longer rest. He called her brave one, beloved girl, even child of promise. But his hands lingered too long when he helped her stand. He stepped too close when giving orders. He began asking her to stay behind after the other girls were dismissed. "You are special," he said one night, brushing his fingers along her cheek. "We could give you more than your village ever could." She stepped back, her body tight with discomfort. "I only came for my family." His glowing eyes dimmed slightly. "You must learn gratitude." The next night her food was cut in half. The next her mat was taken. She was made to stand through an entire ritual, her legs trembling, arms raised high in the dark while cold rain poured down. The kindness had ended. He visited her more often now, usually alone. His voice was still soft but no longer warm. You were warned not to question. You promised silence. You belong to us now. Nia didn't reply. She kept her eyes low. But inside her something twisted. Something that once lay flat now stirred. It wasn't anger, yet. It was awareness. A slow, spreading understanding. This wasn't help. This wasn't protection. This wasn't sacrifice for a greater good. This was control. This was ownership. This was a cage. And she was not alone in it. The forest hummed that night, not with song but with memory. Nia lay awake on the cold earth, her arms curled around herself. Her mat was gone, taken days ago as punishment, and her skin was covered in a fine layer of ash that clung like shadow. She didn't cry anymore. Not from exhaustion nor from fear. But something inside her had begun to unravel, like a tightly bound thread starting to come loose. It was just before dawn when she felt it beneath her, a small, sharp point pressing up through the dirt where her mat had once rested. At first she thought it was a stone. But when she dug it out, she froze. It was a necklace. A thin, fraying cord of sinew strung with 6 small bones, each no longer than a finger segment, bleached white and polished smooth. In the center hung a tooth. Too large for any dog. Too curved for a monkey. Its root was carved with a spiral symbol. A mark she'd seen before, at the base of the stone idol where she burned incense. Her hands trembled. The necklace was a sign. Claiming. Someone had placed it beneath her while she slept. She dropped it and stood up too fast, her head spinning. But the nausea wasn't just from hunger. It was memory, except the memory wasn't hers. A voice. A woman's. Familiar yet younger. Whispering in the dark, "You will not take her." Then a scream, piercing, ragged, then cut off. The visions came like lightning strikes. Nia staggered, grabbing a tree for balance. Images flooded her mind in flashes too fast to fully grasp. A girl, no, a woman, running through the woods barefoot, her dress torn. Rain poured. Behind her, the forest split open, revealing 3 tall silhouettes, their hands outstretched. The woman turned. Her face was bruised. Her eyes full of fire. And she was pregnant. Nia fell to her knees, gasping. Sweat poured down her back despite the chill in the air. The vision vanished, leaving behind only the echo of panic and the feel of wet leaves under ghost feet. She knew the woman. She had seen that fire before, flickering dimly in the sick eyes of her mother. Suddenly it all made sense. The way her mother had clung to her even in sickness. The way she never let the village elders speak of the old forest. The way she flinched when lightning struck. Her mother had escaped the forest. She had run from the tall ones. And Nia was the reason why. She wasn't fully of this world. Part of her came from something else. Something older, darker, less bound to the rules of earth and sky. That's why they had waited. That's why they had been kind at first. Not because of her plea. Not because of her bravery. But because she was theirs. She wasn't just a visitor. She was a daughter returned. The whispers that once lingered in the trees now felt like names. The food that had once tasted rich now churned in her stomach. And the strange glances from the other girls, those sad, quiet eyes, made a different kind of sense now. They had seen others marked before. They had seen what it meant. Nia didn't sleep the rest of the night. She stared at the necklace lying in the dirt. At dawn she buried it. Not because she accepted it. But because she knew they would come for her soon. Not to serve. But to claim. They came for her at twilight. 2 of the tall ones appeared without a sound, emerging from the trees like smoke, their obsidian skin reflecting the fading light in streaks of blue and silver. They didn't speak. One merely raised a long hand and Nia followed. Her feet were heavy but not with fear. Something colder had settled in her chest since the discovery of the necklace. A quiet clarity. She knew now she was not a guest nor a servant. She was a prize. They walked deeper than ever before. The forest grew denser, stranger. The trees had faces, knots twisted into mouths, bark weeping sap that shimmered like glass. The air grew too still as if the forest was holding its breath. Eventually, they reached a clearing she had never seen, round and smooth like the others, but glowing faintly from beneath the ground. A market. But not like the ones in her village with cloth stalls and shouting merchants. Here there were no voices, only silence, heavy and sacred. Spirits drifted like smoke between trees. Some tall, robed in shadows. Others hunched and cloaked in leaves or feathers. Their feet didn't touch the ground. Their faces had no eyes, yet they saw everything. Bundles floated midair, gourds filled with glowing water, feathers dripping with blood, stones that pulsed with heartbeats. There were offerings and traits, but no coins. One spirit exchanged a jar of fireflies for a newborn cry wrapped in silk. Another bartered a goat's final breath for wind that could knock down huts. And in the center, standing on a wide stone slab, was Nia. The tall ones placed her there without explanation, one on either side. They didn't need to speak. The meaning was clear. She was the offering. One of the buyers stepped forward. A shadow being, featureless and massive, its form shifting like smoke in a storm. Around its neck hung dried roots, and from its fingers dangled drops of rain that never fell. The tall ones inclined their heads slightly. In exchange for Nia, the shadow would bring rain, enough to end the drought that had starved her village, enough to swell the rivers and bring back the green. The market waited in silence. Nia felt her throat tighten. Her legs wouldn't move. Her body, herself, was about to be handed away. For a noble cause maybe. But still without her choice. Your help was stolen. Not given. The whisper didn't come from the tall ones. It came from the trees. No, through the trees. A pale figure stepped forward, her outline glowing faintly in the shade. Her feet made no sound and her hands were empty. But her eyes Nia had seen in every mirror, were filled with flame. Her mother. Or what remained of her. Nia's mouth fell open. The ghostly woman approached the stone slab and reached for her, but her hands passed through. Still, the warmth of her presence pulsed in the air. A storm of memory. A storm of love. You were born of pain, her mother whispered, but never meant to be kept by it. Nia's heart pounded. The tall ones turned. For the first time they looked shaken. The shadow being hissed, dark tendrils writhing with hunger. But the woman, her mother, grew brighter. You came seeking help, she said again louder now. Not to be used. The ground beneath Nia's feet shuddered. The market fell still. Spirits backed away. Leaves twisted inward, curling around the stone slab like closing petals. Take it back, her mother said, her voice rising like thunder. Take what you gave. Take yourself. Something snapped inside Nia. Like a thread pulled too tight. She stepped down from the stone. The tall ones reached for her, but this time she didn't bow. She didn't obey. I was never yours, she said. Her voice was shaking, but it was hers again. The shadow being hissed and retreated, its promised rain vanishing into mist. The tall one's eyes dimmed. The clearing shook. Spirits howled, not in rage but in release. And the market vanished. It started with a breath. Shallow. Shivering. Alive. Nia stood alone in the place where the spirit market had once been. The tall ones had vanished into mist. Her mother's ghost had faded with the wind. All that remained was the stone slab, cracked now, and the silent trees standing like sentinels, watching. She could still feel it in her bones, the weight of silence. The vow she had made when she first entered the tall one's domain. She had agreed not to speak, not to question, not to resist. But now everything had changed. Nia's lips trembled. Her throat burned. It had been days since she'd said anything, maybe longer. Her voice felt like a stranger inside her. But deep within, something pulsed, rising from a place no spell could bind. She opened her mouth and whispered her own name. Nia. It was small. Hoarse. The wind stopped. The forest seemed to lean in. Then louder. Nia. The moment the sound left her lips with force, the ground groaned beneath her feet. The air split with a sharp wail like fabric tearing in the sky. The trees buckled inward and a scream erupted, not hers but the cry of the forest itself. Spirits began to flee in streaks of color and shadow, howling, dissolving. Her vow was broken. She didn't wait. She ran. Branches lashed out, vines snaked across the earth, roots twisted to trap her feet. The forest, once a maze, was now a mouth, closing, caving in. But she didn't slow. She knew what she had to find. The sacred hut, the shrine at the edge of the glade where the tall ones kept their offerings, loomed ahead, guarded by blackened stones etched with writhing shapes. She had only seen it from a distance before, but her feet carried her as if they remembered. Inside, the air was thick with incense and old sorrow. Strange relics lined the walls. Bones bound with feathers, jars filled with stardust, dried hearts still faintly beating. But one object sat at the center on an altar of woven roots. A calabash. It was unlike the others she had seen in her village. This one was carved with spirals and eyes, humming softly with golden light. She didn't know how she knew, but she knew. This was the calabash of return. She grabbed it. Pain sliced through her hand and she screamed, this time not in defiance but from the searing heat. Her skin blistered where it touched the gourd, but she didn't let go. She held it to her chest and ran. Behind her, the hut exploded into splinters. The forest lost all order. Paths reversed. Trees twisted and cracked open to reveal hollow insides full of teeth. The sky pulsed red and green. The laws of the earth no longer held. The spirits had lost their keeper, and they were angry. Still she ran. As she passed the hollows and clearings, the other girls began to stir. One blinked open pale eyes, then let out a small gasp. Another lifted her head from the ground, mouth trembling. Dozens, maybe more, began to rise from where they had collapsed in silence. They looked at Nia. Some with wonder. Some with tears. Some with rage. Run! Nia shouted, her voice echoing like thunder. They didn't need to be told twice. Together they fled, through collapsing glades, through screaming roots, through shadows that tried to drag them back. But the calabash pulsed with light now, a beacon in Nia's hands. It shimmered brighter with every step. Behind them, the tall ones finally returned. No longer silent. They screamed, long and horrible, words in no language spoken by the living. They were taller now, monstrous. Their shadows reached out like claws. They were unraveling, their forms splintering with each second. You were ours, one shrieked. You were made from us. But Nia did not stop. She tightened her grip on the calabash, even as it burned deeper into her skin. I belong to no one. The forest responded. The ground opened behind her, swallowing the tall ones in a roar of fire and roots. The enslaved girls, some still limping, some carrying others, crossed the final ridge. And then, suddenly they were out. The trees ended. The night was still. The girls collapsed in the clearing just beyond the last line of forest, beneath the stars. Some sobbed. Others lay silent, staring up at the sky as if seeing it for the first time. Nia stood in the center of them all, the calabash still glowing in her hands. And for the first time she didn't feel like she needed help. She had taken herself back. And something more. The village was quiet when Nia returned, but not from peace. It was the silence of watching eyes, of held breath, of fear disguised as curiosity. People stood in their doorways, staring as she came down the hill barefoot, her hair tangled, the calabash clutched to her chest like an ember. Behind her followed the other girls. Some older, some younger, all broken in different ways. No one cheered. No one asked what had happened. The elders only narrowed their eyes. Mothers clutched their children tighter. And at the center of it all stood the chief, arms crossed, lips thin, gaze cold. I brought it back, Nia said, her voice raspy but unshaken. I brought what you refused to seek. The chief stepped forward. You went into the forbidden forest. I went where none of you dared, she answered. He glanced at the calabash, glowing faintly in her hands. What is that? Nia looked down. The calabash was warm again, pulsing. Its carvings had deepened, the spirals now resembling eyes that watched even in daylight. Her hands still bore the scars of touching it. And deep in her bones she could feel it stirring, waiting. It's what will end the drought, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. She walked to the village square. The earth was cracked and dry beneath her feet. The sky above churned with heavy gray clouds. She could feel the pressure building as though the air itself braced for what came next. Then slowly she lifted the calabash high. And shattered it against the ground. The sound rang out like a drumbeat. A deep, thunderous note that echoed across the hills. The pieces of the calabash scattered in all directions, and from its broken center rose a column of black mist. The sky broke open. Rain fell. At first there was joy. Children reached out their hands. Men tipped their faces upward. Women laughed in disbelief. For the first few moments, it looked like salvation. Then the screaming began. The rain turned cold, too cold. It hit the skin like tiny blades. Where it touched the earth, steam hissed. Crops curled and blackened. Palm fronds twisted like hands. The huts began to creak as if under invisible weight. A baby shrieked as welts formed on his arms. A woman's face blistered within seconds. The laughter turned to sobs. Nia backed away, eyes wide. The girls who had followed her cried out and scattered for cover. Villagers ran in every direction, trying to outrun the downpour. But there was no escape. It wasn't a natural rain. It was return. The forest's curse had not been broken. It had followed her home. The chief stumbled forward, wiping blood-tinged water from his brow. What did you do? He snarled. What have you brought upon us? Nia shook her head, chest heaving. You wouldn't help me. You left us to starve. You let them take me. You unleashed something far worse, he roared. I tried to fix it, she cried. I tried to bring back water, food, hope. The villagers circled her now, desperate and afraid, some with sticks, others just fists and fire in their eyes. Nia stood alone. Then one of the girls, small, no older than 8, stepped in front of her. Her skin was burning red, her eyes watering from the rain. But she faced the crowd and spoke. She saved us. You didn't. Another stepped forward. Then another. A wall of wounded girls, silent no longer. Nia looked up through the downpour. The sky boiled above her. Thunder cracked like bones. Maybe she hadn't escaped the curse. But she had changed it. Not all gifts bring healing. Some bring reckoning. And the land would remember. They dragged her at dawn. Hands rough with fear and calloused by guilt bound Nia's wrists with braided rope. Her feet stumbled through the mud, still slick with the poisoned rain from the night before. The village, once sun-baked and desperate, now shimmered under a strange light, neither storm nor dawn but something in between. The people gathered in the square, eyes filled with blame. Mothers whispered prayers, fathers clutched machetes, and the children, those old enough to remember the hunger, stared in silence. All of them had made up their minds. Nia had brought ruin. She would burn for it. At the center of the square stood the chief, draped in ceremonial red, a torch in hand. Around him, elders nodded as if this moment were justice long delayed. No one questioned what they were doing. No one remembered that she had once been a girl begging for help. Only that the sky wept fire and the trees still groaned with pain. She called upon forbidden spirits, the chief said, his voice cutting through the still air. She cursed the land. Let her return to the ashes she made of us. They tied her to the post. The firewood smelled sweet as if it remembered it had once been a tree. The torch in the chief's hand flickered closer. Then everything stopped. A sound, low and humming, filled the square like rising wind. At first no one saw them. Then one by one they emerged. The girls. Dozens of them. From the edges of the village they walked, barefoot, faces calm, eyes glowing faintly with a strange light, amber, violet, silver. The same girls who had once been silent shadows in the forest now moved with quiet power. Some were bruised, some scarred, but all stood tall. They surrounded the square in a perfect circle. The villagers backed away. The chief hesitated, torch wavering. Then the youngest of the girls stepped forward. Her voice was soft, but it carried like wind in a canyon. She was not the curse. She was the warning. Another girl raised her hands, fingers trailing light. She didn't summon darkness. She stole herself back from it. Then Nia spoke, her voice raw, cracked from smoke and rain but alive. I didn't bring this pain. I returned it to where it came from. And at her words the air split. The earth trembled. The ground inside the circle cracked and from the fissures rose smoke. No shadows, no them. The tall ones. Towering figures of obsidian and ash. They rose slowly, eyes glowing red, forms shifting between man, spirit and beast. They looked at the girls not with rage, but recognition. You called, one of them rumbled. We unbound, said another. Nia stared up at them still tied. You broke the pact, she said. You used our hunger. You fed on our silence. The eldest of the girls stepped forward. She drew a line on the ground with her toe. It glowed gold. The others followed, each girl drawing a line, chanting softly, until the tall ones were surrounded by a glowing circle of fire. It wasn't ordinary fire. It flickered in blues and whites, reds and greens and deep ancestral gold. It sang. The tall one stepped back. For the first time they looked afraid. You are still ours, one whispered. No, Nia said. We were never yours. The flames surged upward, becoming a pillar. The tall ones howled. Their forms twisted, split and scattered into cinders. The ground swallowed the fire and sealed shut. The silence after was not empty. It was peace. The sky cleared. The soil exhaled. Far in the distance trees straightened. Birds returned. A soft rain began to fall, gentle, cool, healing. The villagers dropped their weapons. Some fell to their knees. The chief stepped back, eyes wide with something beyond fear, shame perhaps. No one spoke. The ropes around Nia burned away on their own. She stepped down barefoot, hollow-eyed. The girls gathered around her, not as survivors but as something older. Change. The curse had lifted. But the price was carved deep. Not in blood. In the way their laughter no longer came easily. In the way their shadows flickered when no light was near. They had bound evil. But they had also bound a part of themselves. and they would carry that forever. The forest had changed. Where once the trees bent low with sorrow, now they stood tall, their leaves whispering secrets in the wind. Flowers grew where nothing had bloomed before. The soil was dark, rich with memory. And deep within the green heart of it all, half covered in moss and vine, rested a single stone. It bore one word, carved with care, softened by rain and time: Nia. No dates. No titles. Just a name. The villagers didn't speak of what happened in the open anymore. They didn't tell the full story around fires or in temples. But children still learned her name. Women still made quiet offerings. And when the dry season stretched too long or the wind carried too many dreams, someone always made their way into the forest, to that stone. No one claimed to remember the exact spot where the calabash had shattered, but a shrine had appeared nearby, built slowly over years. First it was just a circle of ash. Then a carved bowl. Then beads, feathers, cloths. Now it stood quiet and clean, swept each morning by the old widow who said she once saw a girl walk into the trees and never return the same. They said if you knelt there and whispered a secret into the earth, the forest would answer. Sometimes with rain. Sometimes with truth. And sometimes with silence so deep, you could hear your own shame. One day, a girl named Amara, barefoot, stubborn, just old enough to question what the elders taught, wandered into the woods. She had heard of the stone from her grandmother, who once fetched water with Nia's mother. They said Nia had brought a curse and a blessing, and that she had vanished like smoke and thunder. Amara didn't believe in stories. But something pulled her deeper into the trees. When she reached the clearing, she saw the shrine. The stone. The wildflowers growing in a ring. She approached carefully, her heart loud in her chest. She reached out to brush moss from the name, but the wind stirred first. It wasn't a normal wind. It didn't bend branches or chill her skin. It spoke. Just 3 words. So soft it could have been her own thought. But it wasn't. Be careful, who you ask for help. Amara froze. The wind blew again, warm and cold at once, and carried the rest of the warning. Some gifts are chains. Her hand dropped. She turned away, slowly, leaving the shrine untouched. As she walked back through the trees, the forest closed behind her, not with menace but with the hush of something sacred. Behind her the stone remained. And under the name, barely visible, a new vine curled in the shape of a girl's voice. She had once been just a child. She had once only asked for help. But now the forest remembered her not as a victim, not even as a witch, but as a warning, and a girl whose name would never truly be silent.